Welcome back to Vietnamese Case Files. Today, we will open the file on a case that shocked Southern California, where the perpetrator was not some brutal thug, but an educated man who had once been a medical student and understood pharmacology almost like a real doctor. This man specifically targeted young men, using sedatives to put them into a dazed, unconscious state. He was even so confident in his plan that he brazenly kept the victims' wallets and watches in his own home like a disgusting trophy collection. So why would someone with medical knowledge spiral into such a cruel and violent path? And what key clue helped police finally catch him? In the next part of the video, the crucial pieces of evidence will gradually be revealed, shedding light on the full, haunting truth behind the case. We also want to note that all content in today's video has been researched and compiled by our team from multiple sources. If there are any mistakes or points that need correction, please leave a comment below so we can update and fix them. Watch until the end of the video to see how these cold-blooded criminals ultimately paid the price, and don't forget to like and subscribe before you leave. And now, let's begin the story. On the morning of the 29th of January 2008, in the 5200 block of Landis Street near the Cholas Creek area of San Diego, a man was walking his dog as usual. As he approached a quiet alley, the dog suddenly barked loudly and pulled him toward a pile of blankets discarded by the roadside. When he stepped closer to check, the man was horrified to realize it was not just trash. Inside the tightly wrapped blankets was the unmistakable shape of a human body. After regaining his composure, he immediately called 911. Just minutes later, the sound of police sirens broke the early morning silence. Investigators from the San Diego Police Department quickly arrived at the scene. The narrow alley, normally just a back passage behind a row of houses, was taped off, drawing a few curious residents who watched from a distance. When the blankets were opened, many people shuddered. Inside was the body of a young man, already cold and stiff, suggesting the victim may have been dead for several days. He lay curled up, still wearing a t-shirt and jeans, with sneakers on his feet. Notably, although he was fully dressed on the outside, the victim was not wearing underwear, an unsettling detail that immediately sparked concern among investigators at the scene. The initial physical evidence was carefully documented by the forensic team. The blanket wrapped around the victim had multiple stains and dried blood, and it was also covered with many strands of light-colored pet hair, most likely from a dog or a cat. In addition, on the uneven ground of the alley, investigator Oplinger noticed distinct tire marks pressed into the dust right next to where the body had been placed. The impressions suggested that a vehicle had backed into the area not long before because the tracks were still relatively fresh and clear. This was considered a particularly important lead because if a suspect could be identified, police could compare the tire tread pattern to the marks left behind for verification. However, the first challenge for investigators was how to determine the victim's identity. To search for leads, police began reviewing missing person reports in San Diego and nearby areas from the most recent days. Before long, a critical clue emerged. Since the previous weekend, family and friends had reported losing contact with a 23-year-old man named Dane Williams, who lived in Huntington Beach in Orange County. Dane had traveled to San Diego to attend the ASR trade show and then suddenly disappeared in the early morning of the 26th of January after going out in the Gaslamp area. Dane's identifying information, his age, build, and even the clothing he was last seen wearing matched the victim discovered in the alley on Landis Street. Police then contacted Dane Williams' family in Orange County. Relatives provided dental records and a DNA sample for comparison. The results confirmed that the person found was Dane Chandler Williams, the young man who had gone missing 3 days earlier. This information was quickly relayed to the victim's family. From there, investigators began tracing the details of his life and his final movements in order to uncover leads. Dane Chandler Williams, born in 1984, was the son of a family living in the coastal city of Huntington Beach in Orange County, California. At 23, Dane was full of energy and ambition. He was passionate about surfing and skateboarding, loved adrenaline-filled activities, and was well liked by friends for being outgoing, kind, and warm-hearted. In October 2007, after graduating from college, Dane eagerly accepted a marketing internship at Hurley International, a well-known brand in action sports. His trip to San Diego for the ASR trade show therefore held special meaning, seen as his first major opportunity in the career path he was pursuing. On the night of the 25th of January, 2008, after a day of work at the trade show, Dane and a few friends stopped by the Hard Rock Cafe in the Gaslamp area for entertainment. At around 2 a.m. on the 26th of January, the venue's security camera recorded Dane leaving alone. In the video, he appeared unsteady, stumbling as he walked, and at one point even tripped, collapsing onto the sidewalk with both hands and his knees. That was the last time Dane Williams was seen alive. After that moment, he vanished completely, only to be found dead 3 days later at a location several miles away. A preliminary report from the medical examiner stated that Dane's body showed no severe injuries that could directly explain the cause of death. The most likely initial conclusion was mechanical asphyxia. However, in early March 2008, toxicology results from the victim's blood and tissue samples revealed a critical detail. Dane's blood alcohol concentration was determined to be more than twice the legal limit for driving, at approximately 0.17%, indicating he was heavily intoxicated. More notably, experts also detected traces of quinine, a component commonly found in tonic water, along with diazepam, the active ingredient in the sedative Valium. The combination of a large amount of alcohol and diazepam was enough to cause a healthy person to become severely impaired, nearly losing all awareness and the ability to resist. This suggested that Dane had been given a sedative before he was killed. The next major lead came from the knit beanie the victim was wearing when he was found. Strangely, when police interviewed witnesses, many insisted that on that night they saw Dane sitting outside the bar, but he was not wearing any hat at all. So where did the beanie on the victim's head come from? Later, the forensic results on the hat left investigators stunned. The inside of the beanie contained biological evidence from an unknown man. This discovery indicated that Dane had been subjected to severe sexual assault before, or at the moment he was no longer able to defend himself. The seemingly harmless knit hat thus became a key piece of evidence, revealing the true nature of the case. Soon after, the unknown DNA profile collected from the hat was entered into the federal criminal DNA database in hopes of identifying the person involved. However, the results showed no match. This meant the perpetrator likely had no prior criminal record, so his DNA was not in the system. For months afterward, San Diego police continued to pursue leads. They reviewed lists of known sexual offenders in the area, questioned suspicious individuals, but every effort failed to produce a breakthrough. The Dane Williams case gradually stalled and became a cold case. A turning point finally came on the 19th of August, 2009, when the crime lab notified investigators with shocking news. A newly obtained DNA sample matched the profile collected in Dane Williams' case. Investigators were nearly overwhelmed by the update. Specifically, experts found the matching DNA in another case that occurred in San Diego in June 2009. In that case, a male victim was fortunate enough to survive and voluntarily came forward after being assaulted. However, at the time, the perpetrator's identity had still not been confirmed. That meant both cases were connected to the same person, one that left Dane Williams with no chance to return home, and another in which the victim survived. This was the breakthrough investigators had been waiting for. They immediately contacted the unit handling the June 2009 case to compare information. The surviving victim was a 20-year-old hospitalman apprentice in the United States Navy, stationed at Camp Pendleton in Southern California. According to his account, one evening in June 2009, the sailor was out in the gas lamp area of San Diego when he met an Asian man in his 30s who approached him and offered to show him around the city. Trusting the offer, the sailor agreed to go with the man, who introduced himself as Phil. The two got into Phil's car and drove away from downtown. During the drive, Phil gave the victim 2 pills that he claimed were Tylenol, a common pain reliever, along with a little alcohol to help wash them down. Letting his guard down, the young sailor took both pills. Within minutes, he began to feel dizzy and quickly lost consciousness. When he woke up, he realized he was lying on the floor of an unfamiliar room, with his clothes disheveled, no underwear, and signs on his body indicating he had been seriously assaulted. Though his mind was still foggy, he forced himself to stay calm and found a way to leave the house. He had to walk for hours before he could make it back to base, completely exhausted. That traumatic experience led the victim to report the incident to military investigators and cooperate with the San Diego police. As a result, authorities were able to collect the perpetrator's DNA from the victim's body and clothing. For San Diego investigators, having a living witness was an extremely important step forward. Even more notably, the suspect had left the victim a phone number, supposedly so they could stay in contact later. The number was a prepaid line not registered under a real name, making early tracing difficult. However, using call data, police tracked the numbers that contacted it frequently and gradually narrowed down several notable connections. One of those numbers led them to an older woman. When questioned, she said the man known as Phil was her grandson, whose full name was Philong Huynh. As investigators dug deeper into that name, they felt a chill. Huynh had attended medical school, had knowledge of pharmacology, and had also accessed and possessed sedatives in the benzodiazepine class, meaning he had the ability to render someone unconscious. Police also discovered that Huynh lived with his mother on Whiteman Street in City Heights, less than 250 meters from the Landis Alley where Dane Williams was found. Huynh also owned a van, and in an eerie coincidence, the tire tread pattern on that vehicle matched the tire marks documented at the scene. By this point, the key pieces were in place for investigators to decide it was time to act. On the afternoon of the 10th of September, 2009, police quietly surveilled Philong Huynh as he drove away from his home. When the vehicle reached the area of Orange Avenue and the timing was right, the task force moved in quickly, restrained him, and arrested Huynh inside the vehicle. The 39-year-old suspect was handcuffed and transported to the San Diego Police Department's detention facility. Almost at the same time, police executed searches at two locations connected to Huynh. One was an apartment he had registered as a temporary residence but rarely visited. The other was his mother's home on Whiteman Street, where he primarily lived and which was also very close to the crime scene. The search was conducted carefully over several hours, and what officers recovered gradually revealed the terrifying reality behind this man. At his mother's home, police found several sedatives from the benzodiazepine class, the same category as Valium, stored with care, along with a Valium prescription issued under Huynh name. When investigators examined the suspect's personal computer, they also found search history showing that Huynh had looked up extensive information about purchasing anesthetic drugs and how to use them. Clearly, Huynh had prepared his tools well in advance. With his deep knowledge of medications, he knew exactly how to use them to control his victims. Worse still, inside Huynh's home, police discovered a hidden compartment containing numerous items: clothing, watches, wallets, and personal belongings, belonging to different young men. It appeared that Huynh had kept these items as trophies after each assault. When police examined them more closely, one of the watches was confirmed to belong to Dane Williams. At the same time, the mystery of the knit beanie found on Dane's head was also solved. The hat belonged to Huyhn's mother. The suspect had taken it from the house and put it on the victim while moving him, possibly to conceal or disguise him. Ironically, that seemingly harmless detail became a crucial clue, helping investigators recover biological evidence and expose Huyhn's true identity. In addition, in the family's laundry room, forensic examiners seized a blanket whose pattern and material matched the one used to wrap the victim. Analysis showed that the dog hair found on the blanket at the scene came from the dog kept by Huyhn's family. The final missing piece was a notebook hidden away. Inside were the names and nicknames of many young men, organized by dates and locations. When investigators cross-checked it, they felt a chill. It was a systematically kept list connected to the people Huynh had drugged and assaulted. Both Dane Williams' name and the US Navy sailor's name appeared in this notebook, alongside many other names police had never known about. With the evidence growing increasingly clear, Philong Huynh was taken into an interrogation room. In front of investigators, the 39-year-old man maintained a cold, unnervingly calm demeanor. Huynh denied any involvement, insisting he had harmed no one and claiming the entire case was simply a misunderstanding. However, at this point, Huyhn's continued denial carried little weight. Investigators already had a chain of evidence strong enough to charge him. Huyhn's DNA was collected via a buccal swab, and just one day later, comparison results confirmed it was an exact match to the biological evidence recovered from Dane Williams' body as well as the US Navy victim. On the 15th of September, 2009, the San Diego Police Department officially forwarded the entire case file to the district attorney's office. Philong Huynh was charged with especially serious offenses, including intentionally taking a life during the commission of a sexual assault, along with additional charges related to the assaults of Dane Williams and the US Navy servicemen. The suspect was held under strict detention, with no bail and no right to release pending trial throughout the legal proceedings. According to the investigation, Philong Nicholas Huynh, born around 1970, was a Vietnamese American. His family immigrated and settled in San Diego, California in the early 1980s. Growing up, Huynh was considered a capable student with strong academic performance. He graduated from college and even attended medical school through his third year before abandoning that path. With that educational background, Huynh possessed fairly deep knowledge of pharmacology, especially drugs that affect the nervous system and how to use them. His later life was unstable. He was unable to maintain long-term employment. At the time of his arrest, Huynh was working for a company that supplied medical equipment in San Diego. People around him described Huynh as withdrawn, rarely socializing, and almost completely detached from the community. Records also showed that Huynh had never had a criminal conviction in California, which explained why his DNA profile had not appeared in the criminal database earlier. However, while reviewing his past, police found that Huynh had previously been accused of sexually assaulting a man in Tijuana, Mexico, although the outcome of that case was not clearly recorded. In addition, there were reports suggesting Huynh may have been required to register under special monitoring in the state of Arizona, but this detail was not confirmed by the San Diego Police Department. Investigators assessed Huynh as an especially dangerous offender whose actions were repetitive and carefully calculated. He often targeted young men who were considered attractive, and most were heterosexual. According to investigators, Huynh's motive most likely stemmed from deviant desires. He was drawn to straight men and wanted to dominate them while they were unconscious. To do that, Huynh devised a sophisticated plan. Typically, he would show up at nightlife bars to look for targets. When he noticed a young man had drunk enough and become separated from his friends, or was in a state of impaired awareness, he would approach and start a conversation. Huynh presented himself as outgoing and friendly, steering conversations toward partying and nightlife to create a sense of connection and lower the other person's guard. Once he gained their trust, he would often suggest continuing the fun at another location, even painting enticing invitations that could last late into the night. More than a few young men, intoxicated and off their guard, agreed to go with him. When they were alone, Huynh began carrying out his plan. He would try to give them pills disguised as pain relievers or secretly slip the drugs into their drinks. After a short time, the victim would fall into a dazed, semi-unconscious state, losing awareness and control, creating the conditions Huynh needed to carry out his planned wrongdoing. He could then easily take the victim to locations he had prepared in advance. Sometimes it was his mother's house in the City Heights area, where the late-night streets were quiet and there were few passers-by, making it less likely to draw attention. In other cases, Huynh drove the victim to a temporary apartment he rarely visited, which made it easier to conceal what he was doing. Most victims only regained consciousness hours later, confused and unable to clearly remember what had happened. Some, out of shame or panic, did not dare report the incident, allowing Huynh to remain outside the reach of the law for a long time. From late 2007 to early 2009, Huynh repeated the same method with multiple different victims. According to prosecutors, at least 6 men were identified as his victims during this period, including Dane Williams and the US Navy servicemen. What they had in common was that they had known Huynh only briefly and had no prior relationship or ties to him. Throughout the investigation and trial, Huynh showed no signs of remorse or fear. His cold, almost emotionless demeanor made even seasoned investigators wary. In June 2011, nearly 3 years after Dane Williams was gone, Philong Huynh was brought to public trial at the San Diego Superior Court. Facing extensive evidence and testimony from multiple witnesses, Huyhn's defense argued that there was no direct proof the defendant had intentionally taken Dane's life. They claimed the medical examiner could not determine a specific mechanism of death, and that the theory of asphyxiation during the assault was only an indirect inference. However, the jury was not persuaded by that argument. After less than 3 hours of deliberation, they unanimously concluded that Philong Huynh bore criminal responsibility for all charges. The defendant was convicted of an especially serious offense related to Dane Williams' case, along with charges involving sexual misconduct and exploiting victims' unconsciousness, in both cases involving Dane and Jeremiah. In August 2011, the court sentenced Philong Huynh, 40 years old, to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This sentence meant Huynh would never be free and would spend the rest of his life behind bars. As the verdict was read, Huynh kept a cold expression, showing almost no emotion. In contrast, inside the courtroom, Dane Williams' family held each other and broke down in tears. Dane's father, Jim Williams, said through sobs that his family had painfully waited 3.5 years for this day, and they had finally received answers and justice for their son. After the initial trial, Philong Huynh filed an appeal with the California Court of Appeal, claiming the legal proceedings had not been properly conducted. Huynh also objected to the court allowing multiple surviving victims to testify, arguing that doing so created unfair prejudice against the defendant. However, by late 2012, the appellate court rejected all arguments raised on appeal and upheld the life without parole sentence for Philong Huynh. In April 2013, the California Supreme Court declined to review the case, meaning the life without parole sentence for Philong Huynh became final and fully effective. The person responsible for this series of grave offenses ultimately faced a fitting price, bringing an end to a long period of fear within the community. The case involving Dane Williams and Philong Huynh was closed legally, but its aftermath continued to leave a lasting shadow. During the period of 2011 to 2012, media and public attention in Southern California focused heavily on this rare case. Traditionally, when society talks about the risk of being drugged or exploited while intoxicated, it is often assumed to be a danger faced primarily by women. But through Dane Williams' story, many were forced to confront another reality. Men can also become victims of the same kinds of dangerous acts if they let their guard down. For that reason, this case serves as a clear warning to young people that when going out at night, everyone needs to stay alert and cautious, regardless of gender. In addition, the courage of the surviving victim who chose to speak up carried special significance. That decision helped investigators uncover the crucial lead and prevented further harm from continuing. It is a powerful example showing that if someone becomes a victim, speaking out can help protect others from the same danger. In your view, what should society do to better protect men, victims who are often overlooked or reluctant to speak up in similar cases? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and share this video to spread the lesson of vigilance to more people, and subscribe to the channel to join us for the next cases. Thank you for watching, goodbye, and see you again in tomorrow's episode of Vietnamese Case Files.